Good morning. My name is Byron Borger, and my wife Beth and I opened a bookstore 30 years ago in central Pennsylvania at the little town called Dallastown, down below Lancaster and Gettysburg, that neck of the woods. And it is a real privilege to be here and share a little bit with you a glimpse of my work as a bookseller, a small independent retail shop owner. After listening to our previous speaker and the video, it makes me feel sort of small because we're in a small town and have a small bookstore. In fact, to give you a glimpse of my work, I'll start doing it right now. This is a work conference, huh? So bear with me just a second while I do my job. Everything back there at the book display is 20% off. Not bad, huh? Thank you very much. We take credit cards, by the way. It's all hooked up. My wife Beth is back there working the cash register and so forth. So yeah, take a lot of stuff home because we really don't want to lug it back. We do have this bookstore, and it's interesting. The first time I heard it, I was perplexed, but I thought, well, it was a weird person. Then I heard it again. I heard this line where someone walked into our bookstore, and we don't even call ourselves a Christian bookstore, by the way. It's called Hearts and Minds from Philippians, but nobody knows exactly what we are. They walk in, and they see books on art and engineering and science. In those years, right by the one door, we had a section on kind of media studies. We have some of those books back there. They walk in the store, and they look, and they say, oh, we thought this was supposed to be a Christian bookstore. And you don't know whether to laugh or cry. That people think that because we have books on politics or science or the arts or dance or media or education or engineering, that therefore we're not a Christian bookstore. Like, where does that come from? That was a question David asked Dr. Mao. Why is it that we have this sacred secular dualism and we have this sort of disconnect between Sunday and Monday? We thought this was supposed to be a Christian bookstore. That's the very thing that we started to try to stop. I think when we think about our own calling, Beth and I, we got into this book business not in really because we know anything about business. I learned more from our previous speaker just a moment ago. Business is supposed to create wealth, he said. I didn't quite get that memo yet. You learn something every day. I was an education major, a special ed major, in fact, and Beth was a sociology major, and we worked in campus ministry, and we had this great desire in Pittsburgh in those years, as we worked with college students, to help them relate the Lordship of Christ to their work and their major and their studies, taking every thought captive, as the Bible says, being non-conformed to the ways of this world, Romans 12:1-2, but having a renewed mind. Well, I didn't quite know how to do that except by having book discussions. So I would find nursing majors or architect majors or business majors, and we would read books together about a Christian perspective. Some of my young students said, you know, you ought to own a bookstore. You're always making us read these books about developing a Christian perspective in your field. And we found that most Christian bookstores, I don't know if you shop in those kind of stores here in the city, but down where we are, they just don't have any of those kind of books. So we decided to start a bookstore that would have this kind of laid out like any other ordinary bookstore. You know, a section on art history, and a section on special ed, and a section on racial reconciliation and urban design, and all sorts of things like that. Emphasizing worldview and the Lordship of Christ. And as we would try to encourage people in their professions to read deeply and think wisely about what it means to connect Sunday and Monday. And that's why people are confused, because frankly, we don't have a lot of bookstores like that. And I'm not patting ourselves in the back, don't get me wrong. But it is something that we feel called to do. In the description, they called me a connoisseur of books. I think that's a great compliment, and I'm probably not as smart as some people think. We just are surrounded by these books that are out there from great publishers that really are doing the job. We've been in correspondence with publishers for 30 years, in fact, trying to encourage them to do these kind of books. Here's just a little case study, in fact. It was a guy that the Redeemer Center here brought in a few years ago, Sam Ben Emin. He has a book on advertising. It's not the best book that we're finally going to do on a Christian perspective on advertising, but it's the only book on a distinctively Christian approach to advertising. And he's a dear friend, and he wrote this wise, thoughtful starter book on advertising. You had him to speak up here. The book went out of print in about a year. And I called the publisher and I said, why is this book? It's the only book of its kind. Why did it go out of print? They said, well, nobody bought it because bookstores didn't take it, Christian bookstores, because they didn't have a shelf to put it on. They literally didn't know what to do with the book because they didn't have a media studies section or an advertising section like a real bookstore would and should. So we have it in our media studies section, and back there at 20% off. Did I say that? That's advertising. Well, that's the problem we're involved in a publishing industry that has a chain of kind of odd bookstores that don't carry books about the very things we're here convened to talk about today. Well, you may ask where I got excited about these things, and I'm almost out of time, but let me just tell you. In the 1970s, I heard of a guy that you've heard about here already. His name was Abram Kuyper. Kuyper became the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, and you probably know, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, he came to the States, went to the White House. Rich Mouw wrote a book about him, now finally a very accessible introductory book on the nature of Kuyper. It's called Abram Kuyper, a short and personal introduction. Well, I heard an old friend of Mouw's, when I was in college, a Dutchman that had studied this tradition, tell us about this phrase that he used about Jesus redeeming every square inch of creation. That comes from Kuyper. It may be one of the more important books back there. Keller's books are all wonderful. We have his books as well. But this book by Rich Mouw on Kuyper is really helpful. Well, I mean, for today's topic, it really, really is. You heard Mouw say, "Do it again," that line from Chesterton. Do you really believe that God cares about a putt? Or that God cares just about a poem, even done by the unredeemed? As Mouw said, I mean, that's a pretty challenging idea. He wrote a whole book about that called He Shines in All That's Fair. See, I'm doing my job again. He shines in all that's fair, culture and what Kuyper called common grace. These are the ideas that are going to help us work the very ideas we're here to study today. And it's the kind of things we are excited about. Andy Crouch has a book back there called Culture Making. And again, when I heard those phrases from Rich Mouw in the 1970s, it allowed Beth and I to want to change the world. And we became maybe not connoisseurs of books. When we sold books at the IM conference not long ago, they called us a curator of books. And maybe that's it. We select resources from the best we can find, listening to others and offering to you. We have the daily business problems that every small business owner has. Working with Amazon or against Amazon, dealing with discounts, dealing with issues of employees, trying to be honest, trying to be clear when we foul up, and we do a lot. So we have issues, but our biggest issues aren't of interest to you as a small business owner. What should be of interest to you is that we are curators for you, selecting resources for you people that are in the trenches to do what God has called you to do. You know, at the very end of his life, Paul, who could have been resting on his laurels, wanted to get to Spain, but he never made it. He's arrested, and he's in Rome, and he writes a letter to young Timothy. And in his last letter to young Timothy, he ordered some books. Remember that? He asked for the coat. The mail order thing that we do is nothing. Paul started it. We're here to serve you. Thanks a million.